of kind of thinking about this from top to bottom and where you might want to go next on this. So next we are going to hear from Kim Ellis at Metro. So from a regional perspective, Kim is a principal transportation planner and project manager with Metro, with more than 20 years of experience in transportation planning. She led the team for the region's 2014 Climate Smart strategy, which looked at land use and transportation policies, led the third major update to the regional transportation plan, and also is currently managing the regional mobility policy update along with ODOT to update how mobility is defined and measured in the Portland area. So we'll turn it over to Kim.
Great, thank you. And I'm gonna start my presentation here. Can you see that okay? Okay, great. So I'm really excited to be here today to share some of our work. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time just walking through sort of what we did through the Climate Smart, development of the Climate Smart strategy, which really set the stage for our last update to our regional transportation plan, which was adopted in 2018, and share a little bit what we learned from developing the Climate Smart strategy, which then led to how we incorporated analyzing further greenhouse gas reduction from the projects and investments in our long range plan. Just for context, for folks that are not familiar with Metro, we are the NPO for the Greater Portland area, which the city of Portland is part of. And the region has had a long history of linking land use and transportation, which has its basis in our statewide planning goals and led to adoption of the 2040 growth concept back in 1995. And so in our mind and practice, that really has been our platform for local and regional climate action in the region. And implementation of that growth strategy is also implemented at the local level. So each city and county has adopted plans that fit their needs and priorities, but support that broader land use and transportation plan adopted by the region, working towards achieving all 6 of these outcomes, including leadership on climate change. The Climate Smart strategy was mandated for the region to develop out of legislation back in 2009, House Bill 2001. We spent 4 years as a region collaboratively developing it. This was the outcome of the strategy. It was adopted in 2014, approved by the Land Conservation and Development Commission the following year. And then our most recent update to the Regional Transportation Plan fully incorporated policies and investments that would help us work towards achieving the greenhouse gas reduction targets that had been adopted by LCDC. It includes land use and emphasizing low carbon development patterns, of which our 2040 growth concept, really that is what it is. Focusing growth and development in centers and corridors served by transit, more transit-oriented development and mixed use in those centers that you saw on the map, and working to maintain a compact urban growth boundary in the region so that people have the ability to drive less often and less distance to get to destinations. And then as part of that strategy too, supporting the state work to transition to low carbon and zero emissions vehicles, but in the RTP and in local plans, the things that we can influence more directly are expanding transit service, completing biking and walking networks. While we have a very robust transit and active transportation network, there are gaps all across the region, but also we have programs at the regional level as well as at some of the more localized level to provide incentives for people to walk, bike, use transit, and also to carpool, vanpool for commute and other trips. And then the region also has a pretty long history of using technology to help operation of the system, intelligent transportation system, signal timing, and then more recently, we've been advancing practice on what we've called enhanced transit corridors, which is really trying to be able to move buses in those congested corridors more efficiently because of growing congestion on the transportation system, impacting their reliability and ability for people to get where they need to go using transit. As part of developing the climate smart strategy, we did use, as Peter mentioned, the Green Step model. So this was sort of the precursor to Vision Eval. ODOT and others have been working to continue to enhance that tool to support analysis. We, as part of the process, adapted the statewide model to run at a regional scale. And so early on, we didn't know what it would take to meet our target. And so we used the model to do sensitivity testing, really to see what policies and investments would have the greatest ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the Portland area. And so we developed, through that work, we found these areas had sort of the greatest potential for reduction. We also developed a star rating, a climate benefit rating system, just to help communicate that. One of the things that we've struggled with is there's a lot of data, a lot of numbers, and to really simplify how we're communicating, particularly to the policymakers and the public, about the relative benefits for carbon reduction of these different strategies. And so community design and transit are a key centerpiece of the climate smart strategy. We did not include pricing. That's something that's happening or being discussed at the state level, also within the Portland area, as ODOT is doing a tolling study. And then work is continuing to happen at the state and hopefully the federal level to continue to advance the transition, because those are the transition of the fleet is a key part, but you can't get all the way to our greenhouse gas reduction targets with just changes to fleet and technology. You do need to have walkable communities and expand transit. So those were the greatest reduction potential in the region. Active transportation, the travel information, and then the system management strategies had more moderate reduction, but important reductions. And then, not surprising, the lowest potential reductions really were from adding capacity to the system. And while recognizing that doesn't mean you don't make those kinds of investments, we just need to be really intentional about where and when those investments are happening, and also recognize that different parts of our region are at different stages of development and have less developed transportation networks. So moving in, so using that information, again, we adopted the plan, the strategy, and began implementing it right away, advocating at the legislature for more funding and other things to support it. But we also, in 2015, started an update to our long-range transportation plan, and it included 4 new strategies, or updates and new strategies as part of the process. Developing a freight strategy, transit, and safety strategy. We also updated our regional travel options strategy, and then developed an emerging technology strategy. Climate Smart, you see there on the bottom right, we already had an active transportation plan that had been more recently updated. We are actually in the process of updating our system management and operations plan for the region right now. All of these elements and the new RTP have greenhouse gas reduction as a key area of focus. and development of the plan and those strategies really relied on significant, important technical analysis, but really also focusing on public engagement and understanding what priorities people had for investments in the transportation system and the kinds and the outcomes that we should be getting as part of investing in our system. And these 4 areas, we have 11 goals in the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, but these 4 areas really emerged as part of the process as our priorities for how we're investing. And similar to what Peter described, while equity and safety, climate, and reducing congestion are a top priority, we want to have investments that are actually helping us address all 4 of these areas to the extent that we can. And so with that in mind, we went through our process to update our investments in the plan. And here you can see our financially constrained priorities really focus, the biggest, the majority of the investment is in operations and maintenance, both of the road and highway system, but also transit. But we have significant expansion of transit capital, our MAX line, streetcar, as well as frequent bus and enhanced transit corridors. We do have highway investment that has been approved by the legislature, and planning work is happening. And then other investments in our roads, completing our active transportation network, expanding travel options programs, as well as our system management and operations strategies. And getting to that set of that investment package, we really and focused on those 4 priorities as key outcomes that we needed to address, but following this performance-based planning framework, which is part of our federal mandate, but also what our RTP has been trying to do since the 2010 RTP, where we adopted our first aspirational targets to get at climate, active transportation goals, and other things, but trying to use the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and measuring progress towards those through our investments in the evaluation system. So I'm going to walk through just a high level what we evaluated or how we evaluated the overall system. I think some of what we've been grappling with is, up until this RTP, we've really only evaluated at a system performance level. So the overall plan and how well is it addressing the goals and objectives of the plan. With this update, we expanded that to be more explicit in considering what the transportation equity benefits and burdens of the package of investments provided, and then also piloted a project level evaluation. We looked to Portland, but we also looked to the Puget Sound Regional Council, also the MTC and the Bay Area and others for ideas of how best to look at the project level, because what we learned or what we felt is that while the system performance is important for how does the overall package of projects perform, and that's similar on the equity analysis as well, but how are individual projects actually helping contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving safety, improving those equity outcomes, and also addressing congestion. So these are just some of the examples of at a system level. We're a growing region, and we'll expect to continue to grow. And the investments really did a lot in terms of addressing the transportation needs and serving those needs, and also resulted at a system level of significant reductions in pollutants, of air quality, but also greenhouse gas emissions towards the target. We also saw, I think at a 4% level, reduction in VMT per capita. In our equity analysis, we looked at what was important to historically marginalized communities. There was a lot of engagement in identifying these priorities. And so the evaluation looked at how well improved access, or how well access was being improved for historically marginalized communities to jobs, to essential destinations, in terms of access to travel options, and access to transit, complete active transportation networks, which are important from a climate perspective, also improved traffic safety, as well as public health. Other two priorities around displacement and affordability had been identified through the process, but we just don't have the technical capability to evaluate that at this time. But essentially, this analysis compared for historically marginalized communities and identified in the darker census tract areas. These are areas of concentrations of those communities relative to the rest of the region as a whole. And then for the project evaluation, what you see here is what we piloted. We evaluated those 10 categories that I showed in an earlier slide, those evaluation factors, the criteria that we looked at specific to air quality and climate change. We're really trying to assess how well an individual project could reduce air pollution, air toxics, criteria pollutants, as well as greenhouse gas emissions, and whether or not a project would reduce VMT in an area that had higher concentrations of particulates or sensitive populations and land uses. Again, this was a pilot. We ended up tabling it because we just didn't have the capacity to really do. We have 1,000 projects in the RTP, and I'll walk through a little bit of some of the things that we are contemplating as we go forward. We do feel that this is an important piece of what we should be doing in terms of reporting to policymakers and our stakeholders around the overall performance of the plan, but also how well individual projects are helping address climate and those other three priorities. But we use the evaluation, the overall system evaluation, and the transportation equity analysis, including the greenhouse gas emissions analysis that we did using the travel demand model and MOVES to report back through a series of regional leadership forums that resulted in recommendations to further refine the project list to better address climate, safety, equity, and congestion. And so we reported the results, had regional discussions around that, and then policymakers directed local governments and other transportation providers to update their lists to look at shifting things to the near term, also better highlighting how projects actually help improve equity, safety, climate, and congestion, and then potentially shift projects that were outside of our constrained project list and our what we call our strategic list, which are additional investments that we would pursue, but to maybe shift some of those projects that focused on climate, equity, and safety in particular to the financially constrained list, which largely everybody did. And so it really, the information from the evaluation really helped inform refining our projects, which was a new step in our process. And in terms of the evaluation of our climate outcomes, we found at the end, as we did the final evaluation, that we are on track to meet our greenhouse gas target. As part of our adoption of the climate smart strategy, we set out a monitoring set of targets that were really tied to the types of investments that were included in the strategy. And that's largely what we are monitoring right now, and then using MOVES to evaluate the greenhouse gas emissions. There is a disconnect of that because our target that was developed at the state level, which the climate smart strategy was developed to meet, was using the green step model. And so, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. You cannot compare the two. And so we simply reported what the reduction was, but really focused on the investments and policies that we had assumed in our climate smart strategy as a way of tracking whether or not we're on track or need to make some course corrections. We also found that in terms of the access to travel options, we make progress, but we do not meet the target that we had established for completing the active transportation network, which is a key part of our climate smart strategy. But we did, thanks to House Bill 2017 that was passed by the legislature, we were able to get to the transit service level of investment of climate smart in this RTP financially constrained set of priorities. So we met it, but what we learned through that process, we can meet our goals if we can fund and implement our plan, but we do need to do some more work to prioritize our projects and programs around their carbon reduction potential, and deferring the project evaluation, while disappointing, was the right thing to do, but we want to continue to work to improve our tools and our ability to measure and track carbon emissions over time. Just to highlight, these are the primary tools that we used, the travel demand model that the Metro maintains. It's a 4-step model. And then we also used MOVES as part of doing the analysis. We consulted, we set it up in the ways that's in accordance with what EPA tells us for conformity. While we're now in attainment status, we're not required to do a conformity analysis, but it is the tool that we've maintained for decades for this region as we were a maintenance area. But we did consult with ODOT on the assumptions to at least address the emissions rate, the average GHG emissions rate that was assumed in the target, and then used it to estimate our greenhouse gas emissions and other criteria of pollutants. So some of the lessons learned, just sort of wrapping up, this is a continuing field that's continuing to evolve. I think some of what we've learned, and we've been having internal conversations since Climate Smart that continue today. But I think we all recognize that the data and tools are not perfect, and we need to do a better job managing expectations around what they can tell us, but also use them. We also found that there is value. We need to do the system level evaluation, but we also need to do work towards some sort of project level of evaluation, sort of recognizing that each has limitations, but it provides important information for sharing with policymakers and the public. It was a lot of work to do the system evaluation. We had 11, actually, I think that had 11 different factors, the evaluation framework slide I showed previously, but we have 18 system performance measures. And then on top of that, we're evaluating transportation equity as part of that system evaluation. So there's and then the prep work that we were trying to do with the project level of evaluation. And so that's something that we have to overcome to streamline and sort of more institutionalize it, but also not have it be overly complex that we can't utilize it. We also found that it was really important to test the new methods. We are trying to do a better job evaluating around those 4 priorities, and we were testing new measures around all 4 of those areas, and including with the project evaluation. And so it really helped us identify what are some of the challenges in terms of methodology. It highlighted some of the limitations of the tool, and then we also have spent time talking about what is the right level, what's the right geography for the system level. At the regional scale, and reporting regional level results is just not satisfying enough to our policymakers or our stakeholders. It doesn't give enough detail. It gives you sort of the general trend and direction that your investments are going, but it doesn't really get to how different parts of the region may be performing. And so that's something that we will continue to work towards improving. Also that different evaluation strategies are going to be needed for different types of projects. One key outcome of the project evaluation is that as we go forward, we will be looking for ways to compare bike and pedestrian projects relative to each other and transit projects relative to each other, but not trying to compare how a highway project, a road project, a transit project, bike active transportation project perform relative to each other. And then there's the idea of a large portion of the investment in our system at the regional level, at the state level, and the step that Tara was talking about. There's a lot of maintenance and operations projects in addition to the capital projects. And so we need to find different ways to get at what the greenhouse gas outcomes of those, and then the large versus small capital projects as well. We have projects in our RTP that are $1 million in cost, and building sidewalks for a mile, half mile. But we have projects that are $40 million adding new road connections and growing parts of the region. And then finally, I think we still have a lot of work to do to improve our communication and visualization of the results, to really characterize it and ground it in ways that it resonates with policymakers and the public. Going forward,
Kim, if you could just wrap up in a minute or so, that would be.
Yep, this is the last slide. So
great.
Just going forward, we really want to continue aligning our efforts with the state. We're going to begin scoping our next long-range plan update. It's an opportunity to continue to advance those capabilities. I think building on some of the work that Peter just shared that they're doing with Metro as well as ODOT, and then continuing to develop tools and methods for project evaluation. So there's my contact information, and also our project website for the RTP.
Great, thanks, Kim. That was a really great overview of you are obviously putting a lot of work and a lot of thought into this issue. So that's really helpful. Next, we are